Our story begins in England in 1864. During excavation work in the city of York, located in northern England, workers came across an unusually hard structure and began to investigate it. This hard structure turned out to be a carved stone dating back to the Roman period. It also bore inscriptions from that era. The inscription recorded that in the year 108 A.D., the gate of the fortress at Eboracum was rebuilt by soldiers of the Roman 9th Legion, Legio 9 Hispana. This inscription has survived to the present day and is housed at the Yorkshire Museum. Another significance of the inscription is that it represents the last known record of 5,400 soldiers. So who were these soldiers? One of history's greatest mysteries, the 9th Legion, vanished from the face of the earth without a trace. There was no major conflict at the time. These soldiers did not desert, nor did they perish. There are no gravestones. Their service did not end. There are no discharge papers, and they sent no letters home. It was as if something had suddenly erased these soldiers from the face of the earth. This was an almost impossible event within the Roman Empire, as the Roman army was one of the most bureaucratic institutions of the ancient world at the time. Everything was documented. So what really happened? That's why we're here, but this part alone isn't enough to understand the story. We need to go back to the very beginning. Good evening, and welcome back to History for Sleep. I am an absolute history enthusiast, and I am just as fascinated by the blank spaces and the unsolved anomalies of our past as you are. Usually, we look at documented events, but tonight, we are stepping into one of those blank spaces, into a different kind of mystery. But before we go there, as always, I would love to know where in the world you are listening from and what time it is for you. Also, if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. Let your shoulders soften and your jaw unclench. Let your breathing slow down. Let your mind wander through the mysterious corridors of history. Let's begin. Contrary to popular belief, the 9th Legion was not founded in Britain. It was founded in Spain by General Pompey exactly 150 years before it gained that fame. Let's dig a little deeper to understand the logic behind this. The name Hispana means Spanish. This name originates from the first campaigns of the Legion organized on the Iberian Peninsula in the 1st century BC. By the time Julius Caesar was placed in command of the 9th Legion, these soldiers had already proven their prowess in many areas and had become one of the most established units in the Roman army. In Commentarii de Bello Gallico, the work in which Julius Caesar recounts his Gallic conflicts, he also mentions the 9th Legion frequently. In the book, he writes that this legion was present at the conflict of Gergovia in 52 BC. The conflict of Gergovia was no ordinary encounter. This is because the Romans did not emerge victorious from this event. On the contrary, it was one of the greatest setbacks Caesar suffered during his entire military career. The Gauls, under the command of Vercingetorix, forced a heavy toll on the Romans and drove them back from the ramparts. The 9th Legion was present in this conflict and also bore its share of the setback. I'd like to interject here. If the name Vercingetorix sounds familiar to you, yes, you're right. It bears a strong resemblance to the names of the characters in the Asterix and Obelix films, and it's highly likely that the producers drew inspiration from Vercingetorix. This 9th Legion also took part in the conflict of Alesia. In 52 BC, Alesia is located in modern-day France. There, Caesar besieged Vercingetorix in a hilltop fortress and built a second outer defensive ring to keep the relief army at bay. The 9th Legion fought on both sides of this ring simultaneously. Then, in 48 BC at Pharsalus, where Caesar overcame Pompey and brought an end to the Roman Republic, and in 31 BC at Actium, where Octavian overcame Mark Antony and Cleopatra and became the first emperor. Thus, by the time the 9th Legion set foot in Britain in 43 AD, it had seen action in many conflicts over the previous century, but more importantly, it had fought in those 4 conflicts that were of crucial importance to Rome and had earned a reputation for itself. This was not a unit to be sent into ordinary conflicts and wasted. It had a structure distinct from the rest of the army. Imagine you're the Roman emperor and there's a territory to be secured. Send this unit and sit back with a cup of tea. Yes, this was exactly the kind of unit it was. Emperor Claudius issued the order for the expedition to Britain in 43 AD and selected General Aulus Plautius as commander. Aulus Plautius was also one of Rome's most successful commanders. He was given command of 4 legions, and the 9th Legion was among them. Under General Aulus's command, the Romans overcame the Britons at the river Medway in Kent and advanced into the city. Aulus officially forced 11 British kings to kneel. That was truly a success. The Roman historian Suetonius, in his work The Lives of the 12 Caesars, records that Claudius spent exactly 16 days in Britain before returning home. And this is remarkable because Claudius crossed the English Channel to accept a surrender that the 9th Legion's thousands of soldiers had helped secure over the course of months, and he departed 16 days later, whereas those soldiers remained there for the next 60 years. During this campaign, the 9th Legion was stationed in the northern and eastern parts of the new province. These regions correspond to what are now known as Norfolk and Suffolk. The Legion's primary mission was to secure the lands of the Iceni tribe in these regions and maintain a strong presence there. For this reason, a military unit like the 9th Legion was stationed there, as any potential unrest would undoubtedly begin in these areas. Although we have limited information about this period, there is no evidence suggesting any issues with border security. However, in the year 61 AD, a woman emerged and changed everything. Her name was Boudica, and she was the queen of the Iceni tribe. Boudica's story begins with the Roman arrival. Boudica's husband, King Prasutagus, had already established peaceful relations with Rome and was pursuing a moderate policy. According to reports, he passed away from natural causes. Rome seized this opportunity to utterly dismantle the Iceni tribe. They also harshly mistreated Boudica and her daughters in front of the people. And yes, my friends, never provoke a woman's fury. Following this, Boudica raised a force, launched a great resistance, and brought down Camulodunum, then Londinium, modern-day London, and finally Verulamium, modern-day St. Albans. Yes, that's why I said to stay away from a woman's deep resentment. Tacitus, one of Rome's greatest historians, described this event in his book Annals, noting that it ended in extreme severity. There was absolutely no mercy shown, and approximately 70,000 people perished at the start of the movement. In his annals, Tacitus notes that the 9th Legion was the nearest Roman unit, and its commander, Quintus Petilius Ceriolus, sent a relief force south. However, he also writes that even this commander's infantry was overwhelmed in a surprise encounter, and he barely escaped with his cavalry. Tacitus did not name the legion in this passage, and this is the kind of gap that runs through the entire story of the 9th. And writing in his 2021 book, Roman Britain's Missing Legion, Simon Elliot of the University of Kent argued that the identification as the 9th Hispana is strongly supported by everything else known about troop dispositions in Britain at the time, but acknowledged that Tacitus's silence on the unit's name cannot be explained away. A Roman legion at full strength was around 5,400 soldiers, and if the infantry was overwhelmed as Tacitus described, then Ceriolus lost somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 men in one afternoon, and the 9th had to be rebuilt with reinforcements from the continent. And Tacitus recorded in the Agricola that 2,000 legionary soldiers and 8 cohorts of auxiliaries and 1,000 cavalry were sent to Britain after the unrest to replace losses. The rebuilt 9th went north and built a permanent fortress at Eboracum, which is the Roman name for York, and Eboracum became the 9th's base for the next 50 years, and York today sits directly on top of that fortress. And there is a Roman column in the undercroft of York Minster that was once part of the 9th's headquarters building. In 82 or 83 AD, the 9th was sent into Caledonia as part of Governor Gnaeus Julius Agricola's expedition, and Tacitus recorded this in his biography of Agricola, and Tacitus had personal reasons to know the details because he was Agricola's son-in-law. Tacitus described a sudden night encounter on the 9th's marching camp by a Caledonian force that broke through the gates in the darkness and were clashing inside the perimeter before the alarm was properly raised, and the soldiers woke to find adversaries already among them, and Tacitus described the situation as desperate. Tacitus recorded that Agricola sent reinforcements from outside that flanked the Caledonians from behind, while the 9th resisted from within, and the encounter was driven off before dawn. And then Tacitus wrote something that historians have returned to ever since, and he wrote that the soldiers of the 9th were more deeply frustrated than relieved after the event, and said they had not needed to be rescued. David Breeze of Historic Environment Scotland, writing in his 2019 book, The Roman Gask Project, noted that the expedition culminated at Mons Graupius, where Agricola claimed a major success, and Tacitus recorded the Caledonian force at 30,000 warriors, but Breeze argued the numbers are probably inflated, and the event produced no lasting Roman control over Caledonia, since the Romans withdrew south within a generation. The 9th returned to Eboracum, and the tombstone of Lucius Ducius Rufinus, a standard-bearer of the 9th Hispana, was found in York and is now in the Yorkshire Museum, and it records his name and rank and unit and nothing else. In 108 AD, under the Emperor Trajan, the 9th rebuilt the stone gateway of the Eboracum fortress, and carved an inscription recording the work, and a construction worker digging foundations in York in 1864 found that inscription, and it is now in the Yorkshire Museum. and it reads that the work was done by soldiers of the Legio IX Hispana. That is the last confirmed record of the Ninth Legion anywhere in the ancient world. After 108 AD, there is nothing, and the silence is total, and it covers every kind of evidence. Inscriptions, tile stamps, papyri, literary references, administrative records, everything. And Simon Eliot, writing in Romang Britain's Missing Legion, called this absence one of the most striking silences in the entire epigraphic record of the Roman military. And here is something that makes the Ninth TH's history in Britain even more complicated, because the Boudica incident was not the only time the Ninth came close to a severe crisis on this island. In 71 AD, Quintus Batilius Ceriolus, the same man who had escaped the Boudica surprise encounter, became governor of Britain and launched an aggressive expedition into Brigantes territory in the north. And the Ninth was his primary active force, and Ceriolus pushed deep into resistant territory. And the Brigantes were the largest tribal confederation in Britain, controlling most of what is now northern England. The Roman writer Frontinus, who served in Britain, described some of these campaigns in his work Stratagemata, a collection of strategic examples, and he recorded that Ceriolus had brought more adversaries to an encounter than any other governor of the province, and that the operations required everything the legions could give. The Ninth built the first version of the Eboracum fortress during this period in turf and timber, as Roman frontier forts typically were, and the archaeological evidence from York shows a large military installation growing up from nothing on the banks of the river Ouse, and the position was well chosen because the Ouse gave access to the sea and to resupply and controlled the routes north. There is one more piece of evidence from this period that matters, and it is the career inscription of a tribune named Marcus Manius Agrippa, who served with the Ninth Hispana, and whose inscription was found in Italy and places his service in Britain in the early 2nd century. And this is one of the pieces historians use when arguing about exactly when the Ninth was still active. And then 108 AD arrived, and the Ninth rebuilt the fortress gate and carved the inscription, and that was that. The Roman army kept records of everything, and when a legion moved, it left tile stamps at the new location, and when it engaged, it left field reports. And when soldiers passed away, their units recorded the losses, and when a unit was disbanded, the administrative machinery noted it. And the Ninth Hispana, after 108 AD, left none of these traces anywhere. And that silence across every category of evidence simultaneously is what makes the disappearance of the Ninth not just interesting, but genuinely strange. And this is the starting point for one of the great unsolved mysteries of Roman history. And every theory about what happened to the Ninth begins here, with this silence, and with the stone in the Yorkshire Museum, and with 5,400 men who marched into the record of the ancient world and then simply stopped appearing in it. The year 117 AD did not start well for the Roman Empire. Maintaining control had become extremely difficult, and things were going particularly badly in Britain. To understand the importance of the Ninth Legion, we can look at what happened when this unit disappeared. By examining this period, we can grasp just how crucial it was. At that time, Emperor Trajan, who was nearing the end of his reign, had suffered a major setback against the Parthian Empire and passed away in August of the year 117 AD in Cilicia, which is within modern-day Turkey, while returning to his homeland. His adopted son, Hadrian, ascended to the throne shortly thereafter. Hadrian was also considered Trajan's nephew, by the way. Hadrian's father and Trajan were cousins. When Hadrian ascended the throne, the empire under his command had expanded uncontrollably, and there was significant unrest. Of course, Britain was at the forefront of these troubled regions. Many ancient sources mention that Hadrian faced numerous security challenges in Britain and struggled to resolve them. These details are recorded in the compilation known as the Historia Augusta. Spartianus wrote that the Britons could not be kept under Roman control at that time, and that a significant security crisis was unfolding in the province. The exact nature of this crisis is not clearly specified in the sources that have survived to the present day. However, modern historians generally attribute it to northern Britain, where the Britons, who had been difficult neighbors for Roman Britain since the arrival of 43 AD and had previously resisted Roman authority. Now we're getting to the part where we'll really start discussing what happened to the 9th Legion. As we mentioned, the 9th Legion was stationed in northern and eastern Britain. Its base in Britain was at Eboracum, near York. The Legion stood ready to intervene in the event of any incident occurring in Brigantian territory. This was, in fact, the reason for their deployment there. Britain was a difficult place to control, and the 9th Legion was the only unit capable of keeping it under control. Now, the timing here is important. The dates of the crisis in Britain are corroborated by a document written in 108 AD, which serves as the final evidence of the 9th Legion's presence. The theory we're discussing didn't just occur to us. It was also proposed by Theodor Mommsen, the most famous German historian of the 19th century. So he thinks the same way we do, and that makes us even greater historians than he is. Of course, I'm just joking. It's important to note that Theodor Mommsen's ideas aren't flawed. He published highly significant articles on Rome between 1854 and 1856 and won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1902. All of this already demonstrates just how accomplished a man he was. Mommsen argued that the 9th Legion was overwhelmed as a result of the unrest during the British crisis around 117 or 118 AD. Mommsen was very clear. It made perfect sense because the dates aligned, and there's more. It's not just about the dates, because knowing the time isn't enough to understand this event. You also need to know what happened geographically, and when we look at the geography, it aligns with the crises and unrest in Britain. In the section we added at the beginning of the text, namely, that Hadrian came to this city in 122 AD to build a wall for the soldiers' defense, and that this was proven to have been done by the legions. Does this truly explain what happened to the legion, or does it not? One of Rome's finest architectural achievements is Hadrian's Wall. It is very likely that its architecture is even superior to that of the walls of Constantinople. Hadrian's Wall stretches from its starting point at the Solway Firth to the mouth of the River Tyne in the east. It runs along the northern border of northern England for 73 miles. The wall is constructed of stone and turf. It is not a simple, straight wall. It is dotted with forts, mile forts, and watchtowers. Its construction required an enormous military effort and financial investment, taking a full 6 years to complete. This raises the question, why did Hadrian commission the construction of such a costly and resource-intensive structure? Mommsen offers an answer to this question. The loss of the Ninth Legion was a monumental event, akin to the dismantling of a nation's most elite unit today. It had a massive impact at the time. That is why Hadrian had such a massive structure built to secure Hadrian's Wall, according to Mommsen. My personal opinion is that this idea really does make sense. Mommsen's theory was taken up by a novelist named Rosemary Sutcliffe, who published the book The Eagle of the Ninth in 1954. Sutcliffe was a writer who, due to a case of Still's disease she contracted as a child, spent the rest of her life in a wheelchair. She had lost the ability to walk, but her writing ability was legendary. For those who are curious, Still's disease is a form of arthritis. The book she wrote tells the story of a successful officer, nicknamed the Eagle of the Ninth, and his journey to find the Legion's standard. The book was aimed primarily at a younger audience. However, it had a greater impact than expected and garnered significant interest from adults as well. In my opinion, it's an excellent book for anyone interested in the subject. It went through multiple printings and sold thousands of copies, and for the remainder of that era, it shaped the popular image of the Ninth Legion. The novel The Eagle of the Ninth presented the idea that the Ninth Legion had definitively faded away in Britain. It treated this as historical fact. And because it was so well-reasoned and so well-written, it reached a massive audience, leaving people torn between reality and fiction, because the novel was truly excellent. For a long time after the novel was published, this idea became deeply ingrained in that generation's minds, that the Ninth Legion had marched north to Scotland, and there they were overcome and overwhelmed by the Caledonians. This idea stuck with people for a very long time. The 2011 film The Eagle, starring Channing Tatum, who many of you will recognize, was a direct adaptation of this novel. I haven't seen this film, but if any of you have, I'd be happy if you shared your thoughts on it. As expected, the film reached a wide audience, and this unverified claim became firmly entrenched in people's minds. Just like the book, the film stated that the Ninth Legion was overwhelmed in a surprise encounter in Scotland. The 2011 film The Eagle, starring Channing Tatum, who many of you will recognize, was a direct adaptation of this novel. I haven't seen this film, but if any of you have, I'd be happy if you shared your thoughts on it. As expected, the film reached a wide audience, and this unverified claim became firmly entrenched in people's minds. Just like the book, the film stated that the Ninth Legion was overwhelmed in a surprise encounter in Scotland. However, this is where a problem arises, a long-standing issue that has persisted since the 1970s. The problem actually began in the Dutch city of Nijmegen. So let's turn our attention to Nijmegen. Nijmegen sits on the Rhine River in what is now the Netherlands, and in Roman times it was called Novia Magus Batavorum, and it was a significant operational base in the province of Germania Inferior. And in the 1970s, archaeologists working at Nijmegen found tile stamps bearing the mark of the Ninth Legion, and these were multiple stamps from multiple locations at the site, and they were dated by the archaeological context to between roughly 104 and 120 AD. Tile stamps are one of the most reliable forms of evidence for Roman active unit locations, because legions routinely stamped the tiles they produced with the unit's mark, and a tile stamp at a particular site means that unit was there producing construction materials. And the Nijmegen's stamps with the ninth's mark meant the ninth, or at least a significant part of it, was at Nijmegen in the years around 108 to 120 AD, which is exactly the period when the British disappearance theory requires the legion to still be in Britain. And then there was the pendant. And the pendant is one of the most striking pieces of physical evidence in the entire story of the ninth, and it is a small bronze object with silver plating found at Nijmegen, and on the back of it is inscribed the letters Leg Hisp Ix, which stand for Legio Hispana Nona, the Ninth Hispanic Legion, and it is a personal item, a piece of service jewelry worn by a soldier of the Ninth, and it was found in the Netherlands, not in Britain, and not in Scotland. Writing in his 2021 book, Roman Britain's Missing Legion, Simon Elliott of the University of Kent examined the Nijmegen evidence carefully and argued that the tile stamps and the pendant together suggest that after the Ninth left Britain, it was stationed on the Rhine frontier at Nijmegen before whatever finally happened to it. And Elliott noted that the dating of the Nijmegen material to after 108 AD means the legion survived its time in Britain and moved on. But here is another problem with the British disappearance theory, and this one comes from Hadrian's Wall itself. And it is an argument from silence, and arguments from silence can be dangerous. But in this case, the silence is significant. Hadrian's Wall was built by legions, and those legions left inscriptions on the wall recording their work. And scholars have catalogued hundreds of building inscriptions from Hadrian's Wall, and none of them mentioned the Ninth Hispana. And if the Ninth had been lost in Britain around 117 or 118 AD, you might expect some memorial or reference to the lost unit somewhere on the wall that was supposedly built in response to its loss, and there is nothing. By 122 AD, when Hadrian arrived in Britain and wall construction began, the legion at Eboracum was no longer the Ninth Hispana. It was the Sixth Victrix, transferred from Lower Germany, and the Sixth would remain at York for the rest of the Roman occupation and leave hundreds of inscriptions. And the replacement of the Ninth by the Sixth is a documented fact, but why the replacement happened is not documented at all. Simon Elliott, examining all of this evidence in Roman Britain's missing legion, concluded that the British disappearance theory is actually the least supported of the four main theories about the Ninth's fate, and argued that the Nijmegen evidence places the legion on the continent after Britain, and that the absence of any Ninth legion inscription on Hadrian's Wall makes it unlikely the wall was built as a response to the Ninth's loss. And yet the British theory refuses to fade away, and it refuses to fade away for understandable reasons. Because it is the most dramatic version of the story, and because Sutcliffe told it so well, and because Mommsen's authority gave it academic respectability, and because the timing of the crisis in Britain and the disappearance of the Ninth is genuinely suggestive, even if it falls short of proof. The honest answer about the British theory is that it cannot be ruled out, and it cannot be confirmed, and the Nijmegen evidence makes it less likely than it once seemed, but does not make it impossible. And Hadrian's Wall might have been built for reasons unrelated to the Ninth, and the Ninth might have moved to Nijmegen, and then gone back and been overwhelmed in a later phase of the same crisis. And here is something worth knowing about how the British theory became so dominant, because Mommsen was working with the evidence available in the 1850s. And in the 1850s, the Nijmegen tile stamps had not been found, and the pendant had not been found. And Mommsen was making a reasonable inference from the evidence he had, and reasonable inferences from incomplete evidence have a way of hardening into received wisdom. And by the time the Nijmegen Evidence appeared in the 1970s, the British disappearance theory had been embedded in popular culture for 2 decades by Sutcliffe's novel. John Hodgson of Newcastle University, writing in a 2021 paper in the journal Britannia, argued that the Nijmegen Evidence has been interpreted too broadly by some scholars, and that the tile stamps and pendant may represent only a small detachment of the ninth, rather than the whole legion, and that the main body of the unit could still have been in Britain. And Hodgson's argument has not convinced everyone, but it has kept the debate alive. What the British theory needs to become convincing is a piece of positive evidence, some inscription or tile stamp, or literary reference placing the ninth in northern Britain after 108 AD, and engaged in operations that could have led to its loss. And that evidence has not appeared despite over 1 century of archaeological work in northern Britain and Scotland. And so the British theory sits in an uncertain place. It is the most famous explanation for the ninth's disappearance, and the most emotionally satisfying, and it has the authority of Mommsen behind it, and the narrative power of Sutcliffe's novel supporting it, but it has less direct archaeological support than any of the other theories. And the trail of physical evidence leads not north toward Scotland, but east across the North Sea toward the Rhine, and toward whatever came next for the 9th Legion after it left Britain. The last traces date back to 120 AD and are located in Nijmegen. After that, we find no further traces. However, the theories certainly don't end there. 3 theories have been put forward, but none of them have been proven. The first theories begin in 132 AD in Judea, which is located in the southern region of present-day Palestine. Around the year 132, a man proclaimed himself Prince of Israel. This man was Simon bar Kokhba. He launched a resistance against Rome. The resistance lasted approximately 3 years. The years 132 and 135 were the most intense for both the Roman and Jewish sides. The Roman historian Cassius Dio describes the events in his book Roman History as follows. He reports that 50 Jewish outposts located at key strategic points were dismantled, that 985 villages considered important by the Jews were cleared by the Romans, and that a total of 580,000 men perished. These figures are based on available data. This was a truly enormous number for that time. He also mentions that in addition to the known loss of life, the number of losses was nearly doubled due to the famine, epidemics, and fires caused by the conflict. This is Cassius Dio's account, and the figures he describes also demonstrate just how powerful the Roman Empire was. Hadrian, meanwhile, was personally present during the operations and traveled to Judea to oversee the expedition. Some historians, however, argue that the 9th Legion was overwhelmed during the unrest there. But of course, these are merely theories. However, there is one point that no one can overlook here. The 9th Legion was not the only unit to vanish during that same period. The 22nd Legion, stationed in Egypt, had also disappeared or been lost, and the key point is that these events occurred during the same period. These issues are also discussed in the 2007 book Hadrian and the Limits of Empire by the British historian Anthony Burley. These titles are important. If you want to research this topic in depth, I recommend taking a look at the books I've mentioned. Anthony's theory also suggests that these two legions were overwhelmed during the Bar Kokhba resistance, but this is, of course, merely a claim. The biggest problem preventing us from drawing a definitive conclusion about this historical event is the lack of evidence we have. For this reason, even if the idea is correct, we can do nothing more than call it a claim. However, saying there is no evidence does not mean that evidence does not exist at all. Archaeologists have been conducting excavations in Israel, the West Bank, and Jordan for over 1 century. They've discovered numerous artifacts, manuscripts, and inscriptions from the Roman period. Yet they haven't found even the slightest trace of the 9th Legion. It really does seem as if they were abducted by aliens, as the saying goes. If they were lost, where are the remains? The absence of such evidence in one of the most extensively excavated regions in the world is a difficult situation to explain if the 9th Legion had indeed been there. However, we have another theory, one that takes us not too far away to Armenia. In 161 BC, the Parthian king Vologases IV, I'll interject here, you can think of the Parthian Empire as similar to Iran. Geographically, they're almost identical, advanced into Rome's province of Armenia, and caused severe disruption there. In fact, after this event, Rome realized it had expanded too far and began a controlled withdrawal. Regarding this matter, the historian Fronto, teacher to the great Stoic Marcus Aurelius, immediately wrote a letter to the emperor following the setback. In the letter, he wrote that the loss was immense and that the legion had been overwhelmed in the city of Elijah, which is now Erzurum, located in the eastern region of modern-day Turkey. According to Fronto, this was truly a massive crisis. He noted that the events in Armenia even brought to mind the memories of Roman military setbacks during the eras of Crassus and Antony. Here comes the part that's confusing again. In his letter, Fronto does not specify which unit was overwhelmed in Elijah. This, in turn, sparks another debate among historians. A large number of historians argue that the unit that was overwhelmed was the 9th Legion. Actually, I don't think this is illogical, because the timing aligns. The last records of the 9th Legion date to 165 AD. After that time, we have no evidence of its existence. The incident that occurred at Elijah is dated to 161 AD. That is why this claim holds strong ground among historians. Simon Elliott of Istanbul City University carefully examined Fronto's letter in his 2021 book, Roman Britain's Missing Legion. According to Elliott, the lost unit was the 9th Legion, but this could never be proven because the letter made no mention of it. In other words, according to Elliott, this is true but cannot be proven. However, as you can see, the conclusion is always the same. Without evidence, these remain merely theories. However, we encounter another problem here. As is always the case, there is a problem with the part theory, just as there was with the Bar Kokhba unrest. In this region, that is, in the province of Armenia or the eastern part of the Roman Empire, no inscriptions, ceramic seals, or papyri have been found to indicate that this legion was stationed here. In other words, even if the 9th Legion was in this region, it left no evidence behind. But something occurred to me. What if we just couldn't find it? Or what if they left traces that were later cleared away? These are the wild questions running through our minds. Now we come to the third theory, perhaps the one that will sadden us the most. What if this unit was disbanded? Rome had a disbandment system. Could they have disbanded and phased out units that were deemed irredeemable in this way? In the Roman army, if a legion was disbanded, its members were distributed among other units. The remaining soldiers were withdrawn to a temple, and the unit's name was removed from the active roster. Depending on the unit's size, this was noted and recorded. There are examples that have survived to the present day. This is where archaeologist Lawrence Kepi comes into the picture. In a 2003 article published in the Journal of Roman Military Equipment Studies, Kepi, who works at the Hunterian Museum in Glasgow, argued that the disbandment of this unit had not been sufficiently discussed. Since Hadrian's reign was somewhat turbulent and he was known for his reforms, he had set out to reorganize many units. Could the 9th Legion have been among those disbanded? And here is a comparison, because the disbandment theory is unsatisfying in the same way that most true things are unsatisfying, compared to dramatic alternatives. And the difference is between a legion that went down engaged in conflict in the Judean hills or on an Armenian riverbank, and a legion that was struck from the rolls by an official in Rome who decided that the empire needed a different unit configuration. And one of these is a story, and the other is administration, and the administration might be what actually happened. The key piece of evidence that all three theories have to reckon with is a monument in the Vatican museums called the Colonnetta Maffei, and it is a small column found in the collection of the Maffei family in Rome, and it bears an inscription listing every Roman legion in existence at the time it was carved. And scholars have dated the inscription to between 165 and 168 AD, and the 9th Hispana is not on it. Writing in the Oxford Roman Economy Project papers in 2007, John Spall of the University of Reading described the Colonnetta Maffei as the clearest evidence for when the 9th ceased to exist. And Spall wrote that the absence is unambiguous, and that the 9th was simply not listed among the legions that existed in 165 AD. So the 9th was gone by 165 AD at the latest, and the window between Nijmegen around 120 AD and the Colonnetta Maffei around 165 AD is where every theory places the 9th's end. And within that window are Bar Kokhba and the Parthian conflict, and years of possible administrative activity, and the evidence does not point clearly to any one of them. And there is something that does not appear in most popular accounts of this story, and it is the question of whether the silence is accidental or deliberate. Rome was not a neutral recorder of its own failures, and Roman historians and administrators had strong reasons to minimize or suppress news of severe military setbacks. And the loss of an entire legion was the kind of event that an emperor would want to manage carefully. And Patricia Southern of Newcastle University, writing in the Journal of Roman Studies in 2016, described the ninth's disappearance as unique in the history of the Roman legions, and noted that even units lost in major setbacks usually left some trace, and that the ninth's total silence across inscriptions and tile stamps and papyri and literary references is what sets it apart from every other unit in the 2nd century Roman army. No one has ever found the eagle of the 9th Hispana, and no ancient source records its recovery. And the eagle of the 9th has never come back, and no emperor ever publicly demanded its return. And that silence about the eagle is one of the strangest parts of the entire story. The tombstone of Lucius Bucius Rufinus is in the Yorkshire Museum, and it gives his name and his rank and his unit, and nothing else. And Rufinus was a standard bearer of the 9th Hispana, and he passed away in York. And someone carved his stone, and the stone survived 1,900 years in the ground. And when you stand in front of it, you are looking at a man who served in a unit that would vanish from history within a generation of his passing, and he had no way of knowing that. And here is something worth knowing about the Legio 22 Deuteriana, because it is a unit that has been almost completely forgotten outside specialist circles, and its disappearance is in some ways even more mysterious than the 9th's. The Legio 22 Deuteriana was named after Diotarus, who was a king of Galatia in what is now central Turkey, and he formed the unit originally as his own royal army, and it was later incorporated into the Roman military and stationed in Egypt for generations. And its disappearance from the record in the early 2nd century is so complete that even the date of its dissolution is uncertain. And Anthony Burleigh, in Hadrian and the Limits of Empire, wrote that the simultaneous disappearance of 2 legions from the record within a short period is without parallel in Roman military history, and Burleigh argued the most economical explanation is that both were overwhelmed in the Jewish unrest of the early 2nd century, and that the Roman administration chose not to publicize the losses. And here is a comparison that makes this concrete, because imagine 2 aircraft carrier battle groups disappearing from the United States Navy in the same decade, with no official report and no memorial and no public acknowledgement. And that is roughly the scale of what Burleigh is describing, and the silence surrounding both losses is the same kind of silence. And there is also the question of damnatio memoria, which was the Roman practice of officially erasing the memory of a person or institution that had dishonored Rome. And if the 9th had surrendered to an enemy or turned against an emperor, its records might have been deliberately removed. And Simon Elliot, in Rimong Britain's Missing Legion, examined this possibility and concluded that while it cannot be ruled out, there is no positive evidence for it, and that loss in an encounter or administrative disbandment are more likely. Simon Elliot's own verdict was that the Bar Kokhba or Parthian theories are more likely than disbandment, because disbandment would normally leave some administrative trace, and the 9th left none at all. And a unit lost in a major military setback might leave less trace than one disbanded in an orderly process, and the completeness of the silence actually points toward loss rather than dissolution. And the 3 fixed points around which everything must be arranged are the stone in the Yorkshire Museum from 108 AD, and the pendant from Nijmegen around 120 AD, and the silence on the Colonnetta Maffei from 165 AD, and within those fixed points, The fate of 5,000 soldiers remains unknown and may remain unknown forever. And there is a final irony, which is that the ending most people know is almost certainly wrong. And Sutcliffe's novel and the 2011 film gave the ninth an end in the mist of Scotland, and it is a beautiful ending, and the physical evidence points east, not north, and if the answer is ever found, it is more likely to come from a dig in Israel or Jordan or Armenia than from anywhere in Britain, and the truth will probably be less romantic than the legend, and that is usually how these things go. The stone that started this story is still in the Yorkshire Museum in York, and it sits in a glass case, and it records the rebuilding of a fortress gate in 108 AD, and it gives the name of the unit that did the work, and that unit is the Legio IX Hispana, and that is the last time the 9th Hispana appears in any confirmed record anywhere in the ancient world. York today is a city of about 200,000 people, and it has a medieval wall and a cathedral, and a chocolate factory and a Viking museum, and underneath all of it is the Roman fortress that the 9th built. And you can walk down a staircase in the undercroft of York Minster and stand next to a Roman column that the 9th soldiers walked past every morning. And that column has been in the ground for nearly 2,000 years, and the unit that built it has been a mystery for almost as long. The story of the 9th Hispana has lasted because it has the shape of a good mystery. And a good mystery needs a clear beginning, and a clean disappearance, and an answer that keeps escaping you. And the 9th has all three. And Rosemary Sutcliffe understood this when she sat down in 1954 and turned Mommsen's academic theory into a novel. And the novel is still in print and still being read, and the 2011 film is still being watched. And the theory that inspired both of them is probably wrong. The physical evidence points east, not north, and the Nijmegen pendant, and the Kalaneta Maphai, and the silence in Judea and Armenia all point to a unit that left Britain sometime around 120 AD and ended somewhere in the Eastern Empire sometime before 165 AD. And the how and the where of that ending is still unknown, and may remain unknown, and that uncertainty is not a failure of historical research. It is an honest reflection of what the evidence actually shows. But here's the thing about the 9th that gets lost in the debate about theories and evidence, which is that the 9th Hispana was not a mystery. It was a legion. And a legion was 5,000 soldiers, and those soldiers had names, and some of those names survived. And Lucius Ducius Rufinus, a standard-bearer of the 9th, has his name on a stone in York, and his stone is the kind of object that makes the ancient world feel real in a way that no academic argument quite manages. And Rufinus passed away in York, and someone buried him and carved his name, and the name survived 1,900 years, and the unit he served in is still being argued about. The 9th Hispana deserves to be remembered, not because it disappeared in a dramatic and mysterious way, but because it served for 150 years and engaged in some of the most important conflicts in Roman history, and survived things that should have overwhelmed it, and ended somehow, somewhere, without leaving a trace. And that combination of a long record and a sudden silence is what makes it unlike any other unit in the history of the Roman army. If you enjoyed this story tonight, please go ahead and subscribe to History for Sleep. and leave a comment below telling us which Roman mystery you would like to explore next. And if you know someone who likes falling asleep to forgotten history, please share this with them. We will be back with another story that deserves to be remembered.